A pioneer in public finance since 1955, Ellers helps clients build outstanding places to live, work, learn, and play by delivering focused, fully integrated financial advisory services. We work with more than 1,500 local governments, schools, development authorities, and public agencies, placing their needs and best interests at the heart of everything we do. We help our clients navigate all facets of public finance, including financial management planning, economic development and redevelopment, debt issuance and management, investments and treasury management, and arbitrage consulting. At Ellers, we believe strong communities aren't simply the result of transactions. They're the result of people. We build strong, long-lasting client relationships, collaborating with your staff to complete projects and drive new initiatives forward. Building strong, vibrant, and sustainable communities. Together, it's what we do. For more information, call us at 1-800-552-1171 or visit ellers-inc.com.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss fiscal planning for capital projects and managing the cost of government. I'm Keith Dahl, Municipal Advisor with Ellers, and I'll be serving as your host and moderator today. Before I introduce our special guest and my colleagues, I have 3 quick housekeeping items to mention that will help ensure you have an interactive experience with us today. You'll notice in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there are 2 icons. One is called Q&A and the other is chat. As we move forward through today's session, if there's a question you'd like us to answer, simply open up the Q&A tab, type in it, and click submit. We will take some time at the end of our session today to answer any questions you may have. You may also connect with your fellow attendees throughout the session by clicking on the chat function and typing in your thoughts and comments and sharing those with others. One thing to note, while you can submit any question anonymously, in the event we're unable to get to all of the questions today, we recommend that you allow us to see your information so that we may reach out to you directly and answer any specific questions you may have. Lastly, if at any time during our presentation this morning you start to notice video or audio lag, please go ahead and refresh your browser so that will get you right back on track. Now that we've covered those housekeeping items, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our special guest today, Shelley Peterson, with Finance Director from the City of Champlin, as well as my colleagues from Ellers, Jessica Cook, Economic Development Advisor, and Jean Vogt, Senior Financial Specialist. Jessica is going to kick things off today for us, so take it away, Jessica.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you everyone for attending today on such a beautiful Minnesota day. Hopefully you can take your computer out to a patio and wear sunglasses as you watch. We're going to talk today about how to approach financial planning by profiling 3 communities. But first, I'd like to kick us off by answering the most basic question. Why should we spend time on long-term financial planning when we already spend months every year on the annual budget process? One answer to that question is that the budget horizon is usually 1 year, 2 at most. And as we know, communities make decisions in 1 year that have long-term and lasting consequences, financial consequences. And so by long-term financial planning, we can look at those consequences and inform the decisions we're making in 1 year with what the impact will be out into the future. A second reason to do financial planning is that what cities do are big and expensive. So they can run in the millions of dollars if you think about water treatment plants or fire halls, for example. And that isn't always fully captured in an annual budget, especially if you finance the project and you have debt service in future years. So we want to capture all the impacts of decisions today and how they're going to affect the city into the future. A third and compelling reason is that we view financial plans not just as a tool, but as a process. And it's a process that can help policymakers answer some of the key questions for their communities. So what are some of these key questions? One is, as I mentioned, how do we pay for capital projects? And what portion of the project should be funded with reserves and how much should be financed? And how do we make that decision? Another question is, can we expand services? And this may be adding staff, or it may be doing more miles of road in the pavement management program. And finally, how do we get our board or council to prioritize their decisions and then stick with those decisions, or at least make informed decisions to change those decisions? And if your community is like some I've worked in, it's really hard for council members to meet their constituents' needs, because constituents don't want to pay for services, but they want to live in a really service-rich environment. So they're going to be asking their council members, can I have a neighborhood park? Can I have a hockey rink, etc., without wanting their taxes to go up? So how do you help your council or your board sort through those priorities, put them into a plan, and then have the discipline to stick to that plan? Another reason to do financial planning is if your community, like many communities, has a facility that is not self-supporting, but people think it should be. So these are things like golf courses, art centers, and ice arenas where they're charging revenue, so people think they pay for themselves, but typically that revenue is not enough to pay for the operating and capital costs. So in that case, those facilities can become really contentious in every budget cycle as you try and figure out how to pay for them. Through long-term financial planning, you can identify a dedicated and stable funding source, whether that's property taxes or franchise fees or something else, that you know each year will be available to fund these facilities, and it takes that conflict out of your annual budget cycle. So we've talked about how financial planning can help establish spending priorities and how it can identify new revenue sources. It can also give the council or your board, the policymakers, comfort that what they want to do is achievable at an affordable price, and help them determine what goals that they have are actually achievable. If this is done in a process that's open to the public, it can build public support for new revenues. So for example, if the process of looking at what all that the council wants to do and determining what that's going to cost, and then if the council says, oh, that's going to cost too much, we have to winnow our list, or we have to identify new revenues, and you bring the public along on that process, it builds political support and gives the council or the board the support they need to make some really tough decisions. And finally, rating agencies love long-term financial planning. If you're on a rating call and you can tell your analyst that you have a long-term financial plan and send it to them, that can help improve your management score. Also, often it's an objective to try and improve your bond rating, and a financial management plan can be a recipe or provide guidance on taking steps over time about how that can happen. So as I mentioned, we're going to take some of these concepts and see how they apply to 3 cities. We're going to look at the city of New Germany, the city of Prairie, and the city of Champlin. And we have here at Ehlers done a rate study and a long-term financial management plan for each of these communities. And we're going to talk about some of that work. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jean Vogt, who works with the city of New Germany, who's going to tell us about their circumstances. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. As she mentioned, I work with the city of New Germany, and they are a smaller community with some big issues in the Southwest metro area. Population of 466. So under that 500 threshold for some statutory requirements, we started working with the city back in 2015 when we did their first financial management plan and utility rates study. And we did both of those concurrently. So we really did take a holistic look at the entire city and all of their funds, whether they be governmental or enterprise funds. And we've been providing annual updates for them ever since. This all started back in 2011 when the plans for the Met Council to take over their sewer treatment plant fell through. So then the city was needing to look at doing some serious upgrades and building a water sewer system back in 2011. However, timing is everything when it came to New Germany. And right about that time is when they also got hit with the housing crisis. Took a little while to get out that far, but they had some pretty big plans for their community, and a lot of those fell through. So they had loss of assessment revenue. They were going to assess a lot of these properties to connect them to the water and sewer infrastructure. They had a loss of tax base, which affected their tax rate. And as a result, both their tax rates and their utility rates were very high. So when we started working with New Germany, we started with what can we do right up front, right out of the gate to try and help this community going forward. So we took a look at their existing debt. We refunded what we could where possible to help them with some interest savings on their existing debt. We also worked with them to consolidate and get all of their capital projects in one place so that they could plan and prioritize those projects. And we asked them to throw in absolutely everything. And the nice thing about these plans is you can do a lot of what-ifing. So we asked them to throw in everything, including the kitchen sink. And what could they afford to do? Where were their priorities? And when did they need to be done? And so those were the things that we were really looking at for them. In order to do that, though, we also wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing and ensuring that they had appropriate fund balances. A lot of communities have a general fund balance policy that's adopted by the council. We also want to make sure that they have those same kinds of policies for their enterprise funds as well. And then we took a step approach to reduce their tax rate over time. And it was so the financial management plan really did take that long-term 10-year goal and where are they planning to be at the end of 10 years. We also looked to design their utility rates to cover operating, debt service, and their capital needs and find that balance between their utility rates and their tax rates. And we did this all in a combination of work session studies, council meetings. We would be at their truth and taxation hearings so that the public would be there to be able to answer their questions too. For the city of New Germany, because they are small, we recommended that their general fund balance policy be at least 500,000. This is minimum for the rating agencies, and it really helped that, as Jessica mentioned, be able to show the rating agencies that they did have a long-term financial management plan, and that really did help them. So when we started this process, they were below that $500,000 threshold. They're now above it and looking very stable, which was great. So I mentioned earlier that we had talked about slowly stepping down their tax rate. We try to decrease it about 1.5% per year. And for those folks who work in a community that's in the 7-county metro area or up on the Iron Range, you know all about fiscal disparities. And fiscal disparities in a small community can have major impact on their tax rates. So in order to avoid what we call the fiscal disparities roller coaster, we do this small incremental decrease in their tax rates. And the chart on the right shows that roller coaster as we saw those big spikes in 2014, then dropping in 15, back up in 16. And so then starting in 2016, you can see we've been slowly stepping their tax rate down to try and keep things more stable for them. We also do a utility rate study for them every year. And part of what we do when we look at utility rate studies is we look at redesigning their rates. We want to make sure that the fixed charges of the system pay for the fixed costs and that the usage rates cover those variable costs of the system. Now, I'd love to say that New Germany, they've done a lot of work, they now get to reap the benefits, and to some extent that is true. But as we all know, things come up and we need to keep tackling these new projects and these new issues as they come up. And for them, their sewer treatment plant does not meet the new phosphorus requirements from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So even though we were looking at being able to help build their tax base, because of that, they're still not able to do that. So right now they're looking at connecting with a neighboring community to try and help solve that problem so that they can go ahead and start building again and increasing their tax base. So when we put it all together, like I said, we looked at all of their funds. So that means we're looking at an impact analysis for both their property taxes and their monthly utility rates. And that means looking at it from various property types. What are the impacts on the median residential property? What about their typical commercial property? We want to make sure that we're not hurting the small businesses, but that folks are paying for what they use. And we also want to take a look at those exempt properties. So if you've got a church, for example, they're not paying property taxes, but they are paying for their utility rates. So we take a look at all those different types of properties and what the impact is on them. And with that, I will turn things back over to Jessica.
Thanks, Jean. I'm going to talk about the city of Long Prairie. And this city is located in central Minnesota near Little Falls. It has a population of about 3,300. And like most communities, especially those outside of the metropolitan area, it is providing a full range of city services with a very limited staff. On top of that, they had recently had a staff change before we started financial planning. So Ted Gray, the city administrator, has been there about 2 years now, if I'm remembering correctly. And we did this work in 2020. So he was getting familiar with the city, which is a good opportunity to do some financial planning because it gives new staff a really comprehensive view of what's happening in the community. If you'd go back to the last slide, there's a couple other things I'd like to mention about the community. One is that they had a sewer treatment expansion in 2018, and they have 4 major industries in their community that are meat packing or agricultural byproduct industries. And fortunately, they're all expanding, provide a great labor base or employment base for the community. But they needed additional treatment capacity. So the city expanded their treatment plant, and that of course translated into higher sewer rates and higher sewer bills for those industries as well as the residents as a whole. The city is trying to expand its road reconstruction program, and significantly the county is coming in with two major road projects in 2021. And as those of you in cities know, the counties generally dictate the terms and city contribution for those projects. And so that's a major challenge that the community is facing right now that we wanted to address in the financial management plan. Go ahead, please. So in addition to the county road project, which the city's share of is 13 million, there are a number of other things that the community is striving to accomplish. And as Jean said, she referred to the kitchen sink. I referred to it as the Christmas tree. There's a disciplined process of going through a financial management plan that I want to describe because it can help all of you as you attempt to do this with your councils and with your boards. The first step is we do what we call a baseline model. And in that baseline model, we model in all of the existing operations, all of the existing debt, all of the capital improvement plan, plus the wish list, the kitchen sink, the Christmas tree, whatever you want to refer to it. And in this way, we're being honest brokers with the council and saying, these are all the goals we've heard. Let's put them in and let's see if this is achievable and affordable. Typically, it's not, but rather than rejecting projects out of hand, we're demonstrating that to do everything that the constituents and the council would like usually results in something that's more expensive to the community than they feel the taxpayers and ratepayers want to undertake. And so then we start the process of problem solving. What can we remove from the plan? What additional revenues can we generate? And through this transparent process, we build consensus and we build public support. So let's look at how this process played out in Long Prairie. Like most communities, they have identified several things that they wanted to accomplish. I mentioned that they had already done the treatment expansion, which was a utility thing. And what we're talking mostly about here is the governmental funds and the financial plan for those. So in the governmental funds arena, there was the county road project. There was the desire to expand services. They wanted to hire an EDA director to expand their economic development activities. They were pursuing a grant to hire a school officer position. And as you may know, those grants last 3 years, and then the city is on the hook for the salaries after that time period. And they also wanted to hire an additional person in their public works area. There were also new facilities and equipment needs. They had identified the need for a new fire truck and for a new public works building to store their vehicles out of the elements. As I mentioned, in addition to modeling in all of the desired enhancements to the community, we look at the existing debt. And that's what this graph shows. So the orange bars are the historical debt starting in 2016. And you can see that that has been increasing over time and is expected to continue to increase. The gray bars are the projected debt. But this graph also shows us some opportunity. You can see the bars fall off in 2027. And that means that when there's less stress on the community to pay debt service, taxes can be used for other purposes. So we spotted that opportunity, and you'll see going forward, we use that in the plan. There was one other thing that we discovered about their debt service funds when we looked at that, and that is that best practice is for the debt service that's due on February 1 of each year to be in the bank as of 12/31. So at the end of the year, you have enough money on hand to make your 2/1 principal payment, which is your larger debt payment. What was happening in the city of Long Prairie was that they did not have sufficient funds as of 12/31. So on 2/1 of each year, the debt service funds, or some of them, were going into a deficit position and then getting repaid with the tax collections that were coming in later in the year. So part of what we were trying to solve in this financial plan was getting their debt service funds healthy enough to have funds on hand in advance of the debt service payment. This next slide shows the projected tax impact when we modeled in all of the desires of the community. And on the bottom line, the dollar increase line, it shows the dollar increase impact on a median valued home. This is a metric we like to use because it factors in the tax levy, the tax rate, and what's happening with market values. Sometimes councils will be really concerned that the tax levy is going up, but not realize that because there's an increase in market value, the tax rate is remaining fairly stable. So by looking at what's happening on a median valued home, we're factoring in all the moving pieces of the tax system, and we're also providing something that's really digestible and easy for people to understand, both in the public and at the council level. So what happened when we modeled in all of these, the Christmas tree, shall I say, is that in 2021, we were looking at a dollar increase on the median value home of $160 per year. And that was going to be followed in 2022 with $83 per year. This was deemed too big of a tax increase by the city council. But we also noticed that in 2027, remember when that debt drops off, the taxes are actually expected to go down $76 per year. So part of the trick would be to figure out the timing of additional expenses to take advantage of that new capacity that would be coming. We then asked the council, what level of affordability is acceptable? And they gave us some guidelines. And so we went back and identified some potential solutions. And just as as the case with New Germany, there's usually not a silver bullet, but there's a range of solutions that we look at, which is reducing expenses and raising new revenues to try and make to try and accomplish the community's most important goals and also keep the cost of government affordable to people. So these are the things that we looked at for the city of Long Prairie. The first thing is we structured debt or projected that the new debt that the city would need to issue for the county road project could be structured around the levy that was going down. So that means delaying some principal payment until some of the existing debt has been paid off. The second thing we looked at was postponing some capital projects. So again, we could take advantage of that debt declining. Third, we looked at some new revenue sources. And the city of Long Prairie, this is not something that many cities will experience, but they had $840,000 sitting in a capital project fund, and the project had been completed. So we did some analysis on that, determined that it was non-bond proceeds, so it wasn't subject to all of the federal requirements that bond proceeds are subject to, and that it could be used to buy down future levies and solve the issues that were happening with the debt service funds. Next, we identified another new revenue source. The city doesn't have a stormwater utility, but a large portion of the county projects coming up are related to stormwater. So we determined that if the city instituted a stormwater utility to pay for those projects, that would lower the future tax impact. And finally, the council did some prioritizing. So they eliminated the EDA director position and they postponed the public works hire. The result is shown in this chart. And you can see that in 2021, instead of $160 annual increase, it's $43. And that equates to $3.58 a month. And showing the council or your policymakers the monthly impact is sometimes helpful too, and sometimes we break it down to a daily impact. We were able to achieve by identifying new revenues, delaying projects, structuring debt, we were able to achieve tax increases in the $40 range, which was the goal that the council had set forth. The other thing, like New Germany, is we were able to stabilize future tax increases. So if you look at on the top of this chart, the tax increase was going up and down, kind of doing the seesaw that Jean described. And so it was up in 17 and down for a couple of years, and then a big jump in 20. So by stabilizing that, that creates a much more predictable environment for the residents and the businesses in the community. And lastly, what this did for the city council is it gave them confidence that the city could move forward. And when approached by constituents asking for something or why aren't we doing something, they could explain they've been through this planning process and they now have a tool. So if as Jean mentioned, things do change in communities, and if there's a sudden need for something or there's a new council and priorities change, there's a tool to model that in, and we can evaluate the impacts of that, and the council can then decide if they want to change their priorities. But it's done in a disciplined and transparent way. So now I'd like to turn it over to Shelley Peterson to tell us about utility work that was done in the city of Champlin. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you, Jessica. Again, my name's Shelley Peterson. I'm the finance director here in the city of Champlin. We are located in Hennepin County. We are the northernmost city on the border of Anoka County. We have a population just under 25,000. We're a growing community, although I feel will be fully developed within the next 5 to 10 years. We routinely do a utility rate study about every 5 years. And in 2019, we performed the utility rate study on our water, sewer, and our stormwater funds with the idea that we wanted to ensure that we could support future capital projects, ongoing operations, and then determine if any debt service was going to be necessary as we moved forward. We also established a target cash reserve goal and used that in our utility rate study. We tackled our tiered water rates. So as we all know, it was a mandate that we implement tiered water rates to encourage conservation. I'm thinking it was a little over a decade ago, and we wanted to take a close look at the tiers we initially established and determine if they were doing what we had intended them to do. And last but not least, primarily with our storm sewer fund, we needed to identify, being that our stormwater fund had depleted its reserves, what would a cash balance and bonding model look like to support future capital projects? So what did we achieve in this study? Well, first of all, we're a city that bills utilities monthly. And I have worked for cities that bill quarterly, and what I'm learning in Champlin is a monthly utility bill is a lot easier to chew a rate change or a significant change to a rate model when it's a monthly bill. So in our water rates, we had a base fee that was about $1.50 a month. And in being able to defend or explain what makes up a base fee, the decision was made to identify what those fixed costs in our water utility were. Those would be costs that they're not dependent on consumption at all. So, these are the revenues we need to generate to support whether we had 1 gallon of water used or 1 million gallons. And we took that base fee, and based on those fixed costs, identified that our base fee needed to go up to just under $7 a month. So kind of a big jump there. But at the same time, we looked at those tiered consumption rates, and we wanted to promote conservation. And so we determined that we wanted to look at that winter quarter and identify as many customers as we could, what their median value or median consumption was, and make that the first tier of our rate structure. In our sewer fund, we again looked at those base charges because we wanted to be able to transparently explain to our consumers what made that base charge up. And in this instance, we had a base charge that was just under $18 a month. We were able to, based on the fixed costs in that fund, reduce the base charge down to just under $7, more consistent with our water base charge. But then we shifted our focus on that one and looked at those usage rates and started billing based on actual water usage in that sewer fund. At the same time, we took a little smaller piece of this. We have several low-income programs available to our residents and our customers, and we wanted to phase out the program that was developed in the sewer fund because it wasn't utilized by a large amount of our residents. So we wanted to phase that program out. And then finally, in our storm sewer fund was always a capital improvement fund. And every year we were relying more and more on our tax levy to support the operations and the big capital projects that fund was having. We wanted to see what the rates would look like and what the model would look like to eliminate the property tax levy supporting this fund and move to a more enterprise type fund. So in our water fund, again, the base charge went from $1.50 to just under $7, effective in 2020. And we looked at those consumption figures or gallons for that winter quarter, and it was interesting. We learned that 67% of all of our residential customers' water consumption, 12 months out of the year, were falling into tier 1. So nearly 70% of our customers never hit another tier. And so what we were able to do is capture 94% of all of our residential customers' average consumption during winter quarter and make that tier 1. And so now we are starting to see customers who are using non-essential water in the summer months hitting those other tiers, which is what the state had intended when it mandated a tiered water rate to promote conservation. It also aligned our revenue with consumption. So if you look at this graph over to the right, the orange represents the targeted capital we had, targeted cash we had established for this fund. And in the years prior to the utility rate study, you can see our actual blue bars is our actual cash by far exceeded the targeted goals. And that's because we were trying to ramp up for some significant projects between 2020 and 2022. We had 2 water towers that needed painting. That's a multi-million-dollar project. And we are right in the middle of an AMI metering project, which is another really big project. So our cash reserves are going to drop after these big projects are completed. And the goal with this rate study was to equalize the ongoing cash reserves. And we're slightly above our target, which is a nice healthy balance for this fund. The study also determined this fund shouldn't need to borrow in the upcoming years for any of the significant projects we have planned. And we should be able to use the cash on hand for both 2020 and 2021. We also have a pretty healthy sewer fund, which is good. We again reduced that base charge down from just under $18 to about $6.73 for 2020. We were able to phase out that low income rate program. That's going to be a 5-year phase out. So we are on year 2 of that right now. The rates are now more geared towards usage within this fund. I don't want to say consumption. You don't consume sewer. You use it. So it's more of a usage fee. And we were able to maintain sufficient reserves for those capital projects we have planned here, and we're close to our target. And so the graph here on the left shows we're slightly under our target, but still a healthy cash reserve in our sewer fund. And the last portion of our study was our storm sewer fund. This was a fund that, as you can see from the graph on the right, we depleted cash reserves in this fund with some very historic storm sewer projects that we had going on in the 3 years prior to the study. When 2020 rolled around, we were anticipating we would need well over $500,000 in property tax revenue to support the operations and the capital that was still moving forward in future years. So the study identified that our rate structure was correct, but in order to eliminate that property tax levy, we would need to look at a combination of both a couple of debt issuances and develop a more pay-as-you-use model for this fund. And then in addition, an 18% increase for the next 8 years in our stormwater rate to support the projects and replenish the depleted cash reserves in this fund. And the graph identifies that in a couple years now, we should start to be able to stabilize. Our cash is beyond our target right now, and that's because we did our first debt issuance. We have another debt issuance scheduled for this year. It may be later in the year, and it may be earlier next year because we've had a couple project delays. But the overall impact to the utility customer, year 1 was just about 75 cents. So it was a minimal impact. When you talk about an 18% increase, it is a smaller piece of that utility bill. And our reserves are now going to start spending down as this levels out. The one thing I want to note in our storm sewer fund is we've had a lot of surprise projects. So when a commercial development needs to come into the city, sometimes you identify some stormwater issues. And so we're experiencing some of those challenges right now where this model is going to really be reviewed thoroughly. We're fortunate that as part of the utility rate study, we're provided some tools that allow us to do the what ifs and allow us to go back and say what happened and what's going to happen moving forward to see if this model is going to work moving forward. But so far, year 2, no property tax needed to support this fund. So what were the results? We had some big shifts in those base fees. We had some shifts in our tiers for the water fund. We had some increase in the usage charge for the usage rate portion of our sewer bill, and we had an 18% increase in that stormwater charge. For that 50% quartile medium, we consider a medium consumer, residential consumer, their bill changed by about $1.73 a month. So the overall impact was minimal. We were able to do these big shifts. We were able to very transparently identify what made up that base charge. And if you're a utility person taking these utility calls, it's very helpful to be able to explain better to your consumer what that base charge does. $1.50 base charge, we couldn't explain why it was there. And it really wasn't reflective of what we needed that base charge for. We needed to know that we had that steady revenue stream coming in to support those operations that weren't dependent on consumption. So we had overall minimal changes to those three portions of the monthly utility bill. We were able to remain competitive, and part of the process was to look at our neighboring communities and other communities that are similar to us, and make sure that we fell within what was realistic for our community, like the city of Champlin. And this plan allows us to pay for our capital and maintain those cash reserves that we had targeted. Oh, and that doesn't wrap it up. I forgot. I have food for thought. The important thing with the base fees that we've learned is it's important to address those before they get too far out of whack. So we went from $1.50 to $6.50, almost $7 for our water fund. We had a sewer fund where we saw that base charge significantly drop. But when things get too far out of whack and you want to correct them, it's a lot harder. You have to phase that in over time. And we were fortunate we addressed that now, and we have a very transparent and defendable explanation to what makes up our base charge. The jury's still out on stormwater. We think this can remain an enterprise fund, but if surprise projects keep coming our way, we're gonna maybe have to look at a different model for storm sewer. So the jury's out there. But the great thing with that is when you're looking at consultants and you're going out and getting proposals to do a utility rate study, be sure to ask them if you're provided the tools you're going to need to make sure that what you project 5 years out is still going to be true when those surprises come our way. More recently, last week I received notification from Met Council regarding our sewer processing charges. That one charge alone for operations in our sewer fund makes up 80% of our operations for that fund. We had projected we'd get a 5% increase. We thought that was a reasonable estimation, and they're telling us it's 6.5% increase, even though our processing gallons are significantly less. So that may be one of them that we have to play with, that base fee and those rates, because it doesn't seem to matter if our flow goes down, we still are seeing an increase in what we're being billed by Met Council. A couple other takeaways. This was a big shift for us. It required a couple work sessions with council, very thorough explanations to what happened in the process, very, very thorough explanations as to why we were making these recommendations. We had Ellers come in, which provided a very professional presentation for our council, so they knew this was being done independently of us. We had newsletter articles that were written very user-friendly or very easy to understand reasons why we were making these changes. We phased in the changes. We did the water and sewer adjustments to the bill in January, and then we came back to council and we had a presentation a second time at a formal council meeting explaining what was happening in the storm sewer fund. I think in the end we were able to show our consumers or our customers or our residents and taxpayers that this was a very transparent process, and what we were trying to do was create some equity so that those that used more paid more. And then one final takeaway, I have done several utility rate studies. I don't know if it's because Champlin bills monthly that this went really smooth, but I have been a part of a utility rate study where it was identified that the commercial and industrial customer base was significantly subsidizing the residential usage. And that was a much harder sell for the council and for the public. They weren't happy with the fact that we identified this, and they weren't happy that the commercial accounts weren't going to continue to subsidize the residential customers. So that's an important thing to look at and make sure that doesn't get too far out of whack, because that's a much harder fix in my experience. So with that, I believe I hand this back to Jean, and thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for giving us this wonderful information on the utility rate study in Champlin. And with that, let's look at some final thoughts. As we've talked about with New Germany, Long Prairie, and the city of Champlin, we know that when it comes to long-term financial planning, we really want to help guide decision makers to look beyond just that 1 or 2 year process. Sometimes it's easier said than done. Councils are very comfortable looking at just a 1 year or 2 year budget cycle, but this long-term financial planning can help them see exactly what the impacts are of the decisions that they're making today. The long-term plans also pull everything together in a nice comprehensive package. As we saw with the city of Champlin, we look at those impact analysis. We look at the impact on low, median, and high users of the system. We take a look at the impact on property taxes, on median valued homes, to kind of help look at what that impact is for everyone all the way around. One of my favorite things that we do with these long-term financial planning packages is we allow, these programs allow the ability to do what if. So when Shelley talks about these upcoming storm sewer projects that were not previously planned for, the nice thing is we can put those into the model. We can take a look and see, what does that do to the rates? Can these projects, we need to go back and take a look at a property tax subsidy for Champlin, or can we take a look at other options and other revenue sources? And so that kind of gives councils the ability to go, well, what if we do this? And what if we do that? And what if we change the timing? So that really is a nice, powerful tool that we have there. It also ensures that tax and user rates are appropriate. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're maintaining fund balances that are consistent with city policy as well. And the nice thing is they can be updated as needed. So if a new project shows up tomorrow or a year from now, you have the ability to make those changes easily and quickly. So that's all we have for you today. We're happy to switch to any questions you may have. So let's bring everyone back together for a quick discussion.
Awesome. Thank you for all this great content that you guys shared today. We do have an active audience, and we have some great questions. So I just want to start things off with the first one. And Shelley, I know you mentioned what Champlin does on a routine basis every about 5 years or so. But Jean and Jessica, are you able to speak to how often should a community update a financial management plan and conduct a utility rate study?
Sure. It really depends on the community. There are some communities like the city of New Germany where they like to look at things on an annual basis for both their financial management plan and their utility rate study. But there are some councils that don't need to have an update that frequently. A lot of it has to do with when these large capital projects are going to happen. So a lot of times that will trigger when we do the next update for a study, or it can be every 3 to 5 years, just to make sure that what we're projecting in the near future is actually what happened and what came to fruition.
Great. Jessica, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I think that the 3 to 5 year horizon is a good one, unless there's some extenuating circumstance where a major project changes, or we're having sudden decreases in property values, which doesn't look like will happen after this pandemic, but that remains to be seen.
So speaking of the decreasing property values and taxes, we do have one question specific to New Germany. What steps were taken to lessen the tax rate in New Germany? Jean, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So we do a step-by-step. We try to reduce their tax rate about 1.5% per year. And it's just the city's portion. It's just their rate. It's not the overall total rate. And we have to do that slowly because of fiscal disparities. So what that does is sometimes that requires a little extra levy, or we decrease the levy accordingly, depending on what we need to do maintain that 1.5% decrease in their rate every year. So we take a look at what's happening with their property values and do that analysis for them on an annual basis so they can maintain and achieve those goals.
Perfect. Thank you. So, all right, Shelley, over to you now. We have a question about your base fee and your base charge. Other than bond payments and salaries, what does Champlin include in their list of items used to justify the base rate?
Jean, you might be able to help me with this one, but it is for sure your salaries. It's those, our utility funds pay for the software we use for our billing program. So it's all the meter reading charges, the metering system and what comes with those, the annual fees, the software annual fees, the utilities to operate the facilities, payroll is a big one. I think that's pretty much it, unless, Jean, you can think of some other ones we wrapped into that fixed cost.
Right. So we not only looked at those, we also look at things that are not really, they're more of administrative charges. So the portion of your auditing fees that are allocated to the enterprise funds are also included in that. So things that are not necessarily related to the cost of providing water service. So these are more of the administrative charges that are included in those base fees.
Perfect, thank you. So staying on the topic of Champlin, I know there was one question that came up about the tiered rate structure. Are the state mandates of a tiered water rate structure based on specific city sizes? It sounds like some people haven't heard of this before and they were just curious about if it was dependent upon a city size and population.
I can start with that, Jean. You could probably add. Isn't it true that the tiered rate is only for the metro area, a mandate in the metro area? Is it statewide?
It is statewide, and I'm going to be a nerd here. And it's statute 103G.291. So exactly, thank you. And what that says is that for utilities that serve a population of more than 1,000, so it's not necessarily 1,000 accounts, but if you have 1,000 people connected to your system, whether that be, because if there's a portion of your city that isn't on city water or sewer, you wouldn't include them. But so if they're serving more than a population of 1,000, then you do need to have what's called demand reduction measures in place. And that includes conservation rates. There's other ways to meet those, but the increasing tier block rates is the most common, and it is statewide.
And if I'm not mistaken, they started out with an example, or here's an example of what you can incorporate. And I believe Champlin incorporated what the state had provided as a guideline, and we never really reviewed it after the fact. And this was a really good exercise for us.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you. All right. So now this one's in regards to COVID, and I think I'm going to expand it a little bit further to talk about the American Rescue Plan. But has COVID affected any of Champlin's and New Germany's financial status and rates? And how might the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the communities will be receiving may affect this as well?
Do you want me to start with that one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So I just went online and read some more detailed notes on what we can use it for, because we know water, sewer, and stormwater. And I did find that stormwater does count towards this federal money. We had our first discussions on it yesterday. I'm I can't tell you how fortunate Champlin is that the cash reserves in its water utility fund and its sewer fund are pretty healthy, and we've got a lot of good reconstruction already in place. Our plan is to maybe use those funds to help with the significant storm sewer program we have in place, because that fund seems to have more and more mandates, and we think that those funds can go towards some really important projects in our stormwater fund. Although we are talking about our water treatment plant and some work there, but we do intend to use some of those funds in our utilities.
For the city of New Germany, they're a smaller community, so really what they looked at was some of those COVID safety measures and protection measures that they needed to put in place to be able to work with their constituents at City Hall, provide the necessary technology for their council to be able to meet remotely. So that's where a lot of their dollars came from. They also provide public safety services to a couple of neighboring townships. So their CARES money went to help them with that as well.
Perfect. Okay. Another question we have for you, Shelley. So in regards to the phase out of the low income program, the low income rate that you guys have, are you looking at creating a new program, or is this just going to be phased out?
We have several low-income programs. The City of Champlin, we not only bill monthly, but we bill for garbage, refuse, streetlights, stormwater, water, sewer. And so we have other low-income programs that seem to be more utilized. I think our residents really like the refuse low-income program that's already in place. And so our focus is to eliminate this one in our sewer fund because we had very low participation. And then those were the programs we were going to continue to encourage customers sign up for. It's hard, I'll add, it's hard when you're a utility billing person to have low income programs where you're asking for information that typically a county social service department would need to see to ensure you're allowed those discounts. And so it's something our utility reps really don't like to manage, but we do know it's important for our residents.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification and those points. So our last question is a little bit more generic, even though it's specific to New Germany with what the question was. But Jessica, I'll direct this one to you. How long did the financial planning process take in New Germany? But just in general, how long does the process typically take?
I would say it usually takes about 3 months. So, you need to allow yourself enough time to put that baseline model together as I had described. And then there are usually at least 2 meetings with the policymakers and sometimes more. And so allowing time for those to occur and time in between to make revisions, it's usually about a 3-month process.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you. That's all we have time for today. I want to thank Shelley, Jessica, and Jean for their insights and perspectives. And special thanks to all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us here today. Please note both a copy of today's presentation and a recording of the session will be posted on your virtual attendee hub for your future reference and use. And because we're always interested in learning about ways we can make your virtual experience more dynamic and deliver content that's more valuable to you, we'd like you to take a brief survey at the end of the session. You'll notice just below the chat and Q&A buttons, there's a survey icon. If you open that, you can simply click Take Survey button before you leave here today. And if you don't have time, that's fine. We'll send you an email after today's session so you can take it at your own convenience. Either way, we hope you'll take the time to give us your thoughts on how we did and what we can do better. Thanks again for attending and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank